Welcome to the deep dive. We take your curiosity and the materials you're exploring, and we really try to distill them down into the core insights you need.
Yeah, think of us as a shortcut,
Yeah.
getting you properly informed without that feeling of drowning in information.
Exactly. You share what you're learning. We help pinpoint what's most valuable, how it connects. It's about grasping the essence efficiently.
Right.
So today, we're diving into something pretty interesting, figuring out let's call it the secret sauce behind a successful podcast, specifically one called Chapter Crunch that a listener brought to us.
hmm We've looked into what makes it work,
Mm.
and the aim here is to plot those key principles, the things that really contribute to its appeal.
And we're focusing on, well, four main areas that seem pretty crucial for Chapter Crunch.
Okay.
First, how they craft these summaries of popular books that they really grab your attention.
Right, engaging summaries. Then there's the practical side.
Exactly. Offering practical, motivating ways to actually use the lessons from those books.
Makes sense. And third,
Audience engagement, getting listeners involved, asking questions, using polls, taking suggestions, that kind of interaction.
okay, interaction. And the last piece.
The structure, how they build each deep dive brief intro, the key summary, those practical bits, iconic quotes maybe, and a solid conclusion, keeping you hooked.
Got it. Summaries, practical insights, interactivity, and structure.
Now, here's the thing. Even though we're focusing on podcast creation today, keep an ear out because these principles, they often pop up elsewhere.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like managing tasks, motivation, engagement, leading a team, tackling a big project, just getting an idea across clearly. These core concepts, they're surprisingly universal.
That's a great point. And to really dig into these principles, we're also bringing in another source, Casey Davis's book, How to Keep House While Drowning.
Which I admit might seem like an odd pairing at first glance. A book on managing household tasks? How does that relate to podcasting?
Well, it does. Because when you look closely, the underlying wisdom about effective communication, motivation, handling overwhelm, structuring things, it's remarkably relevant.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's start with that first ingredient then. Engaging summaries. Chapter Crunch is great at boiling down a whole book effectively.
And thinking about how they do that, it really makes me think of Casey Davis's approach in her book.
How so?
Well, think about her deliberate choices for accessibility, making the book easy to navigate, especially if you find dense text overwhelming.
Ah, right, like the sans serif font left-aligned text.
Exactly. Short paragraphs, bolding the key points. Even how she explains metaphors literally sometimes. It's all about clarity.
Maximum clarity, which is precisely what a good podcast summary needs, right? Taking complex stuff and making it instantly understandable in audio form.
Yes, no confusing jargon or long, rambling sections that lose people.
You definitely want to avoid that.
And Davis even offers a shortcut journey through her book. She says readers with limited time or energy can get the core message in maybe 30 minutes to an hour.
That maps directly onto podcasting, doesn't it? Respecting the listener's time. Your summaries need to be concise, impactful.
What's the absolute essential value you want them to leave with? That's the question.
Yeah. And that connects to another core idea from Davis, from chapter 7, I think, about the functional purpose of tasks. Care tasks serve a function.
Right.
So apply that to a podcast summary, its core function, to efficiently deliver the most crucial, useful information from the book.
Exactly. Not every single detail, not every subplot. What truly serves the listener's understanding of the main message and its value.
Mm-hmm. Identifying the core.
And think about her 5 things tidying method, too, from chapter 4, breaking down overwhelming mess into just 5 categories.
Trash, dishes, laundry, things with a place, things without a place.
Yeah. It's a brilliant parallel for summarizing a book. Instead of trying to cover everything, you distill it into key themes or arguments, like categories for the mind.
It provides a structure, a framework for the listener, much easier to grasp than just a flood of information.
Precisely.
Yeah.
A structured overview of the essentials.
And then there's her point, I think it's chapter 22, good enough is perfect.
Oh, I love that one.
Me too. A podcast summary doesn't need encyclopedic detail to be valuable. Focusing on the most impactful takeaways, the good enough, might actually be the perfect way to make it digestible and memorable.
Yeah, absolutely. Aim for understanding and engagement, not exhaustive coverage. Spark curiosity, maybe, but don't overwhelm.
Okay, so engaging summaries makes sense. Let's move to the second element, practical insights. Chapter Crunch gives actionable, motivating takeaways. And again, how to keep house while drowning has some parallels.
It really does. A huge one, starting early in the book, chapter 2, is kindness to future you.
Right. Doing something now, even small, to benefit yourself later.
It's such a powerful motivator, and a good podcast should aim for that too, right? Giving insights listeners can actually apply right away to improve things, delivering value that lasts beyond just listening.
It's about empowerment, not just information dumping. And her points about care tasks are morally neutral in chapter 1.
And mess has no inherent meaning in chapter 5.
Yes. It reframes things functionally, takes away the shame, which makes it easier to actually do something.
And that non-judgmental approach is vital for practical podcast insights too. Focus on what's helpful, what's functional, not on telling people they should be doing something. That invites connection.
Yeah, much more likely people will try things out if they don't feel judged.
Definitely.
And that 5 things tidying method, again, it's not just for cleaning, is it?
No, not at all. It's a practical template for any overwhelming project. Break it down into manageable steps.
So a podcast could do that. Break down a complex idea from a book into, say, 3 concrete strategies to try.
Exactly. Like how Davis talks about gentle skill building or kickstarting motivation later in the book. A podcast can offer similar practical techniques.
Maybe suggesting timed activities like a Pomodoro timer for trying a new habit, or just starting really small.
Yes. Encourage that first small step. Lower the barrier to entry.
And that links to her idea of functional priorities in chapter 12. Listeners need to figure out which insights are most relevant to them. It's not one size fits all.
Right. And think about the hygiene kit idea from chapter 19. Scale down self-care for when the full routine is just too much.
Like offering bite sized, immediately useful tips on a podcast, acknowledging listeners might not have time for a huge overhaul, quick wins.
Precisely. Offering adaptive options.
And I really value the focus on momentum over perfection, chapter 32, and adaptive imperfection in chapter 22.
So important. It's incredibly encouraging for listeners trying to apply new things. Progress, not perfection from the get-go.
It lowers the pressure, makes it feel more achievable.
Absolutely. It's okay to adapt, okay to start small, just keep moving. Consistency over flawless execution, especially at first.
Okay, that makes sense for practical insights. Now, interactivity, the third element for Chapter Crunch. Engaging the audience, questions, polls, suggestions. How does Casey Davis fit here? Her book isn't directly about that.
True, she's not talking about podcast polls. But her underlying principles about understanding people and being compassionate, they offer a great framework for thinking about engagement.
How so?
Well, take chapter 16, where she talks about identifying your plastic balls versus your glass balls, the non-critical tasks versus the essential ones.
Right.
A podcast could literally ask listeners that. In relation to a book's theme, maybe. What are your plastic and glass balls when it comes to X? It sparks reflection, prompts interaction, even if it's just internal for the listener.
That's a brilliant idea, using the book's concepts to frame interactive questions.
And in chapter 7, she talks a lot about understanding your own functional barriers, the specific things making tasks hard for you.
Okay.
So for a podcast, actively seeking listener feedback, understanding their barriers to applying ideas, that helps tailor future content, makes it more relevant, more helpful. It's about understanding the audience's reality.
So interactivity helps you understand the listener's functional barriers.
Got it. And her whole emphasis on being a compassionate observer toward yourself, that encourages a non-judgmental space if a podcast fosters that kind of supportive environment.
Listeners feel safer sharing thoughts, questions, suggestions.
Exactly. It creates a positive feedback loop, builds community.
Makes sense. Okay, finally, the dynamic structure. Chapter Crunch has that flow. Brief intro, key summary, practical bits, quotes, conclusion. Let's look at the structure of how to keep house while drowning.
Well, Davis starts with a really personal, relatable story. Draws you right in.
Yeah, the intro is powerful.
Then the chapters focus on specific principles, offer actionable tips, and often end with a clear takeaway, like the literal interpretation summaries.
It's segmented with built-in summaries. That clear structure definitely helps the reader, and it's a good model for a podcast episode, right? Keeps listeners engaged, helps them track the main points.
For sure. And visually, she uses bold text, short paragraphs,
Yeah.
breaks things down, keeps attention.
Which in audio translates to
Mm.
what? Clear verbal signposts between segments.
Yeah, clear transitions, maybe varying the pace or tone, using memorable sound bites or examples that act like those bolded points, keeping the energy dynamic.
Okay. And she includes shortcuts in the book, like skip to chapter 7.
Right. Catering to different needs or time constraints.
Could a podcast do something similar? Maybe with clearly marked segments or timestamps and show notes, Let listeners jump around if they want.
Absolutely. Offering that flexibility respects the listener.
And the ending of your book, it's really hopeful, isn't it? There is only increased function ahead, and it's going to be wonderful.
Yeah, it leaves you feeling empowered. A strong podcast outro should aim for that too. A positive takeaway, maybe some motivation.
And what about iconic quotes? Does Davis have those?
Not in the traditional sense of pull quotes, maybe, but she has those memorable refrains that get repeated.
Like, care tasks are morally neutral.
Or kindness to future you. They're concise, impactful, they stick with you. They function like iconic quotes, capturing the core philosophy.
So, a podcast summarizing a book could highlight those key memorable phrases to really drive home the central themes.
Exactly. Make them stick.
So, wrapping this up, it's fascinating how these principles for a successful podcast, like we see in Chapter Crunch, the engaging summaries, practical applications, audience interaction, dynamic structure, they really do echo the approach Casey Davis takes in her book.
It seems to boil down to clear communication, really understanding your audience or yourself and providing valuable, actionable insights in a way that's, well, accessible and compassionate.
Yeah. Whether you're tidying a room or distilling a book, it's about making information useful and relevant.
Absolutely. Making it work for people.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. How can you apply these ideas, functional thinking, self compassion, clear communication, inspired by Casey Davis, not just to managing tasks, but maybe to how you create or even just engage with content like podcasts?
Yeah, thinking about your own plastic balls and glass balls when it comes to learning or sharing information. What's truly essential? What can wait?
And what parts of listening to podcasts, or maybe even thinking about creating one, do you find most engaging? Or maybe most overwhelming? Where are your functional barriers or sweet spots?
It's about considering what really serves you, being intentional, and kind to yourself as a learner, maybe even as a potential creator down the line.
Some interesting things to mull over. Thanks so much for diving deep with us today. We really appreciate you sharing your curiosity and your sources.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Until next time.